The conference room at Pacific Coast Title Company smelled like expensive leather and fresh coffee. I sat at the far end of the polished mahogany table, hands folded in my lap, watching my brother Derek charm the buyers with stories about our family beach house. And that's when we decided it was time. Derek was saying, his perfect white teeth flashing as he smiled at the couple across from him. My sister Maya and I both agreed that neither of us uses the place enough to justify keeping it. Better to sell now while the market's hot, right? The buyers, Stephen and Jennifer Park, a tech entrepreneur, and his wife, nodded eagerly. They'd already toured the property 3 times, hired inspectors, and, according to Derek, wired their down payment of $950,000 2 days ago. $950,000 for a Malibu oceanfront property listed at $9.5 million. I said nothing. I just watched. Maya's been so helpful through this whole process, Derek continued, gesturing vaguely in my direction without actually looking at me. She's not great with the business side of things, so I've handled most of the paperwork, but she's excited about her share of the proceeds. Aren't you, Maya? All eyes turned to me. I managed a small smile. It's been interesting, Derek laughed. That practice sound he perfected in his years as a corporate attorney. My sister's the creative one in the family. I'm the numbers guy. Good thing we have each other, right? Jennifer Park smiled warmly at me. It must be hard to let go of a family property. Yes, I said softly. Our grandmother loved that house. That part was true. Grandma Florence had loved the Malibu house with a fierce, protective love. She'd bought it in 1987 with money from her first novel's success, a literary thriller that had surprised everyone by staying on the bestseller list for 46 weeks. She'd written 12 more books in that house, each one overlooking the Pacific Ocean from her second-floor office. She'd also been the only person in our family who'd believed in me when I dropped out of law school to pursue photography. The only one who'd supported my decision to move to a studio apartment in Echo Park instead of staying in the family's Pasadena mansion. The only one who'd understood that I wasn't failing. I was choosing a different path. And she'd been smart enough to protect me from people like Derek. Well, said Thomas Chin, Derek's real estate agent, checking his watch. We're just waiting on the title company representative to finalize everything. She's reviewing the ownership documents now. Should be just a few more minutes. Derek leaned back in his chair. The picture of confidence. He was wearing a $3,000 suit. Hermes or Ermenegildo Zegna. If I remembered correctly from the label I'd seen when he'd hung his jacket. His Rolex caught the afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I was wearing jeans and a simple black sweater. My Converse sneakers probably cost less than Derek's tie. The door opened and a woman in her early 50s entered carrying a leather portfolio and a laptop. Margaret Sullivan, senior escrow officer. I'd looked her up online after Derek had mentioned the closing date. 23 years with Pacific Coast Title, reputation for being thorough, meticulous, and absolutely by the book. Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone, Margaret said, settling into her seat and opening her laptop. I apologize for the delay. I wanted to make absolutely certain all the documentation was in order before we proceeded. Of course, Derek said smoothly. We appreciate your diligence. Margaret smiled professionally and began typing on her laptop. So, we have the buyers, Stephen and Jennifer Park. The seller. She paused, looking at her screen. Derek Morrison and Maya Morrison. Is that correct? That's right, Derek confirmed. Co-owners splitting the proceeds 50-50, and the down payment of $950,000 was wired on Tuesday to escrow account 478B. Margaret continued, still looking at her screen. Confirmed. Stephen Park said, our bank sent the wire at 2:17 p.m. Pacific. I watched Margaret's face as she clicked through screens on her laptop. She was reading something, her expression neutral but focused. Then she clicked again. Read more. Her eyebrows drew together slightly. She opened the leather portfolio and pulled out a stack of documents. Legal-sized papers, the top one bearing the Los Angeles County Recorder's Office seal. Margaret read through the first document, then the second. She went back to her laptop, typed something, waited, read the screen, looked at the documents again, her lips pressed together in a thin line. "Is there a problem?" Derek asked, his tone still casual, but with an edge of impatience. Margaret looked up at him, then at me, then back at the documents. She stood up from the table. The room went silent. "I'm afraid we have a significant issue," Margaret said, her voice steady but serious. "I need to make a phone call before we proceed. Please excuse me for a moment." She gathered her laptop and documents and left the room, closing the door firmly behind her. Derek laughed uncomfortably. "Probably just some clerical thing. These title companies are so paranoid about dotting every I and crossing every T." But I saw the first flicker of uncertainty cross his face. Thomas Chin was frowning at his phone, probably wondering if he should call someone. Stephen Park looked at his wife, then at Derek. "Is everything okay with the title?" "Our attorney reviewed everything, said it was clear." "It is clear," Derek assured him. "This is just standard procedure. Maya, tell them you've been to the house. You know we own it. Grandma left it to us," I said carefully. Not a lie, but not the truth either. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Derek's knees started bouncing under the table, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. Thomas Chin stepped outside to take a phone call. The Parks whispered to each other, looking increasingly concerned. When Margaret returned, she wasn't alone. She was accompanied by a man in his 60s wearing a dark suit. Walter Brennan, according to the name on his business card, which he immediately distributed around the table. Senior Vice President and Chief Legal Counsel for Pacific Coast Title Company. This was not standard procedure. "Ladies and gentlemen," Walter said, sitting down next to Margaret, "we've encountered an issue with the property ownership that prevents us from proceeding with this closing." Derek's face flushed. "What kind of issue?" "I'm the owner. I have the deed." "Mr. Morrison," Walter interrupted gently but firmly. "You don't have the deed. You may have believed you had an ownership interest in the property, but according to Los Angeles County records and the documentation we've reviewed, you do not." The room went completely still. "That's ridiculous," Derek said, his voice rising. "Our grandmother left us the house. Maya and I are co-owners. I listed it. I hired the agent. I've been managing the sale." "Let me be very clear," Margaret said, pulling out one of the documents. "This is the recorded deed for the property at 27348 Pacific Coast Highway, Malibu, California. The property known as the Florence Morrison Estate." She laid it on the table where everyone could see it. "The current owner of record is the Florence Morrison Irrevocable Trust, established on March 15, 2019, just 6 months before Mrs. Morrison's death." Margaret pulled out another document. "This is the trust declaration. The sole beneficiary of this trust is Maya Elizabeth Morrison." She looked directly at me. "You." Every face in the room turned toward me. Derek's mouth opened and closed. That can't be right. The house was supposed to go to both of us. She always said. "Your grandmother established this trust with Silverman and Associates," Walter said, producing yet another document. "Here's the letter of intent," she wrote, explaining her decision. I'll read the relevant portion. "I leave my beloved home to my granddaughter, Maya, who alone among my family has shown the courage to pursue her authentic path rather than the one others expected of her. Maya has honored my legacy by choosing creativity over conformity. And I trust her to preserve this house as a sanctuary for artists and writers, as it has been for me." My eyes burned. I'd read that letter only twice since Grandma Florence died. Once when her attorney had given it to me, and once on the first anniversary of her death. Hearing it read aloud in this sterile conference room with my brother's face turning purple beside me felt surreal. "There must be some mistake," Derek insisted. "I'm a lawyer. I reviewed Grandma's will. The house was listed as part of the estate." Margaret agreed, but noted that it was held in trust and would be distributed according to the trust documents, not the will. "Those are two separate legal instruments, Mr. Morrison. Surely you're aware of that." The implied criticism in her tone made Derek flinch. Stephen Park cleared his throat. "So, you're saying Derek doesn't own this property at all?" "That is correct," Walter confirmed. Mr. Derek Morrison has no ownership interest in 27348 Pacific Coast Highway. He had no legal authority to list it for sale, no authority to accept offers, and certainly no authority to sign closing documents. But I was the executor of her estate, Derek said desperately. I handled all the probate. The trust was separate from the probate estate, Margaret said. It passed directly to the beneficiary outside of probate. As executor, you would have been aware of the trust's existence and should have known it was not part of the assets you were authorized to distribute. The silence that followed was crushing. Jennifer Park looked at me with something between confusion and sympathy. Did you know about this? I took a breath. Yes. Derek's head whipped toward me. You knew. You knew, and you didn't say anything. I said plenty, I replied calmly. I told you 3 months ago when you first mentioned our plans for the house that Grandma had left it to me in a trust. You laughed and said I must have misunderstood the legal documents because I didn't finish law school. You said Grandma would never cut you out like that. His face went from purple to white. I told you again 2 months ago when you mentioned listing the property. I showed you the trust documents. You said they must be forgeries, that I was trying to cheat you out of your inheritance. You threatened to sue me. Derek started, but I wasn't finished. I told you 1 month ago when you sent me the listing agreement to sign. I refused to sign. You told the rest of the family I was being difficult and emotional, that I was having a breakdown and couldn't handle business decisions. You said you'd handle everything for both of us. Thomas Chin, the real estate agent, had gone very pale. Mr. Morrison, you told me you had full authority to list the property. You said your sister had signed a power of attorney. I never signed anything, I said. Jesus Christ, Thomas muttered, pulling out his phone. I told you 1 week ago when you sent me the purchase agreement, I continued, still looking at Derek. I sent you a certified letter from my attorney explaining that you had no authority to sell my property and that any sale would be void. You texted me back saying I was being dramatic and that I'd thank you when I had $4.75 million in my bank account. Stephen Park stood up abruptly. Our down payment, $950,000. Where's that money? Margaret consulted her laptop. It's in escrow. It hasn't been released to anyone. Given these circumstances, it will be returned to you in full within 3 business days. What about our costs? Jennifer demanded. We paid for inspections, appraisals, our attorney's fees. We gave notice at our rental. We've been planning this move for 2 months. Walter pulled out a business card and slid it across the table to Stephen. I suggest you consult with your attorney about potential recovery of those costs. However, I should inform you that this situation may constitute wire fraud. Derek's face went white. Wire fraud? That's insane. This was a misunderstanding. Mr. Morrison, Walter said, his voice hard. You induced the Parks to wire nearly $1 million across state lines for the purchase of a property you do not own and have no authority to sell. You made material misrepresentations about your ownership and authority. The FBI takes a very dim view of such activities. I didn't know, Derek shouted. Maya said some things, but I thought she was confused, that she didn't understand the legal. I'm a photographer, Derek, not an idiot, I said quietly. I had 3 separate attorneys review the trust documents. All 3 confirmed that Grandma left the house solely to me. All 3 confirmed you had no ownership interest. All 3 confirmed that any attempt to sell it without my consent would be void and potentially criminal. Thomas Chin was already packing his briefcase. I'm calling my broker and my attorney. I need to know what my liability is here. He looked at Derek with undisguised disgust. You assured me you had clear title. You showed me documents. I showed you the deed from when Grandma bought the property in 1987, Derek said weakly. I thought. You showed me a 40-year-old deed and claimed current ownership. Thomas shook his head. That's either incompetent or fraudulent. And either way, I'm done. He left without another word. Stephen Park was on his phone, presumably with his attorney. Jennifer was gathering their documents, her hands shaking. Margaret and Walter exchanged glances. Walter spoke. Miss Morrison, Maya, I need to ask you directly. Did you consent to this sale in any way? Did you authorize your brother to act on your behalf? No, I said clearly. I never consented. I never authorized. I explicitly refused multiple times. Did you know this closing was scheduled for today? Yes. Derek sent me an email last week saying I didn't need to attend because he'd handle everything. I decided to come anyway. I met Walter's eyes. I wanted witnesses. I wanted it on record that I tried to stop this, that Derek proceeded despite my clear objections, and that he knowingly attempted to sell property he didn't own. Walter nodded slowly. That was wise. Miss Sullivan, please make detailed notes of everything that's been said here. We'll need a full record. Already doing it, Margaret said, typing rapidly. Derek slumped in his chair, his expensive suit suddenly looking 2 sizes too large. Maya, please. I didn't mean I thought Grandma made a mistake. I thought once we sold the house and split the money, we could work it out. You can't really want to keep that huge place all to yourself. Grandma didn't make a mistake, I said. She made a choice. She chose to leave her house to someone who would respect what it meant to her, not someone who'd see it as a real estate asset to be liquidated. You're going to keep it? Jennifer Park asked, pausing in her document gathering. You're not selling. Not now. Maybe someday if I find the right buyer who understands what the property represents, but not to be torn down and replaced with a modern glass box, not to be flipped for profit. I looked at the Parks. I'm sorry you got caught up in this. My brother's ambition shouldn't have cost you time and money. Stephen ended his phone call. Our attorney says we should file a police report. He says this might be criminal fraud. That's between you and the authorities, Walter said. Pacific Coast Title will cooperate fully with any investigation. We'll also be filing our own incident report. This is a serious matter. Derek looked like he might be sick. A police report. Criminal charges. Maya, tell them it was just a family misunderstanding. It wasn't, I said. You tried to steal my house and sell it without my permission. You lied to buyers, to your real estate agent, to the title company. You ignored multiple warnings from me and my attorneys. You told our family I was having a breakdown when I was actually protecting my legal rights. Our parents, Derek, he said desperately. What am I going to tell them? The truth, hopefully. I stood up and gathered my small shoulder bag. Though given your performance today, I'm not optimistic. Where are you going? He demanded. To the house. My house. I want to make sure you didn't give keys to anyone else or make any promises about move-in dates. Margaret cleared her throat. Miss Morrison, before you go, I need to verify something. You are aware that property taxes on that estate are approximately $118,000 annually. I'm aware they're current. I've been paying them since Grandma died. Derek's head snapped up. What? How can you afford? I'm a professional photographer, Derek. I shoot for Architectural Digest, Vanity Fair, National Geographic. I did a campaign for Apple last year that paid more than your annual salary. I own my studio in Echo Park outright. I have a retirement account with $340,000 in it. I'm not rich like you wanted to be, but I'm doing fine. His expression was a mixture of shock and something that might have been shame. You never asked about my work, I continued. You never looked at my portfolio. You never wondered how I could afford to live in LA without family help. You just assumed I was failing because I didn't follow your path. He stopped, unable to finish. Walter stood. Mr. Morrison, I strongly suggest you consult with an attorney. Given the circumstances, you may be facing both civil liability and criminal charges. You should not discuss this situation with anyone except your legal counsel. Derek nodded mutely. I turned to the Parks. I really am sorry. If you're still interested in Malibu oceanfront property, there are several nice listings in the area. I'd be happy to give you recommendations. I know most of the homeowners on our stretch of beach. Thank you, Stephen said, his tone softening slightly. We appreciate that, and I hope your family works this out. Some things can't be worked out, I said simply. I drove up Pacific Coast Highway in my 10-year-old Honda Civic, the same car Derek had mocked at our parents' anniversary party last year. The gate to my property responded to my code. The driveway curved through wind-sculpted cypress trees, opening to reveal the house. It wasn't a modern mansion. It was a sprawling single-story ranch built in the 1960s. All wood and glass and natural materials that blended into the landscape. Grandma had preserved the character while updating the essentials. I unlocked the door and breathed in the familiar smell of salt air and old books. Grandma's office was exactly as she'd left it per the trust instructions. Her desk faced the ocean. Her typewriter sat on a side table. Bookshelves lined every wall. That was the summer she taught me photography. The summer I fell in love with capturing light and shadow and fleeting moments. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Derek says you ruined the house sale. Call me immediately. I put the phone down without responding. Another buzz. My father. This is unacceptable. Your brother worked hard on that sale. The family needs to discuss this. I turned the phone off. I walked through the house, checking each room. Derek hadn't been lying when he told the buyers it was well maintained. I'd spent the last 4 years carefully preserving it, hiring contractors for necessary repairs, updating systems that needed updating while maintaining the architectural integrity. I'd also been slowly converting the guest wing into a residency program for artists and writers. 3 bedrooms, each with its own bathroom, plus a shared kitchen and workspace. I'd partnered with a nonprofit that supported emerging artists, providing them with 2-month residencies where they could work without worrying about rent or food, overlooking the same ocean that had inspired Grandma's best work. Derek didn't know about the residency program. He'd never asked what I did with the property. I stood on the deck as the sun started to set, painting the ocean in shades of golden coral and deep purple. 3 pelicans flew in formation just above the waves. In the distance, a sailboat caught the last light. My phone, still off, sat on the deck table. I knew what would be waiting when I turned it back on. Angry messages from Derek, from my parents, from relatives who'd heard his version of events. They'd call me selfish, unreasonable, vindictive. They wouldn't understand that this wasn't about the money or the property value. It was about honoring someone who'd believed in me when no one else did. It was about protecting a space that meant something beyond its market price. It was about refusing to let Derek bulldoze his way through my life the way he bulldozed through everything else. I heard a car in the driveway and tensed, but when I looked up, I recognized the BMW. Not Derek's, but my friend Vanessa's. She texted earlier asking if I needed company after the closing. I must have told her to come by before I turned my phone off. How'd it go? She called from the driveway. About as expected, I called back. She joined me on the deck, carrying a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. Vanessa had been my roommate in the Echo Park days before her tech startup had taken off and made her independently wealthy. She understood what it was like to be underestimated by people who should know better. Did he actually try to sell your house? She asked, pouring wine. Made it all the way to the closing table. Down payment was wired and everything. Jesus, she handed me a glass. What happened? I told her the whole story. Margaret Sullivan standing up from the table. Walter Brennan arriving. Derek's face as he realized his scheme had collapsed. The Parks learning they'd been defrauded. The mention of potential criminal charges. Is he actually going to be charged? Vanessa asked. I don't know. Maybe. The Parks attorney was talking about filing a police report. The title company is reporting the incident. And depending on how Derek handled the down payment expectations, there might be wire fraud charges. I sipped my wine. Part of me feels guilty even thinking about it. He tried to steal your house. I know. He lied to multiple people, including buyers who wired almost $1 million. I know he told your family you were having a breakdown when you were actually trying to stop him from committing fraud. I know all that. I stared at the darkening ocean. But he's still my brother. We grew up together. We used to be close before everything. Before he decided you were a failure because you didn't want what he wanted. I didn't answer. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. You know what I think? I think you're allowed to protect yourself without feeling guilty. You're allowed to enforce your boundaries. You're allowed to let people face consequences for their choices. Grandma would have said the same thing. She was a smart woman. Vanessa raised her glass. To Florence Morrison, who knew exactly what she was doing when she set up that trust. We clinked glasses and drank as the last light faded from the sky. My phone stayed off for 3 more hours. When I finally turned it back on, there were 47 missed calls and 73 text messages, most from Derek and my parents, some from other relatives, a few from numbers I didn't recognize. I scrolled through, not reading most of them, but one caught my eye from my cousin Lauren, who'd always been kind, even when she didn't understand my choices. Maya, I don't know what happened today, but Derek showed up at my parents' house talking about lawyers and fraud charges and how you betrayed him. He seems really upset. Are you okay? I texted back. I'm fine. Long story. We'll explain when things calm down. Thanks for checking on me. Her response was immediate. Good. He's acting crazy and blaming everyone but himself. Whatever happened, I'm sure you did what you had to do. I smiled. At least one family member was willing to suspend judgment. The next morning, I received an email from Margaret Sullivan at Pacific Coast Title. The Parks had indeed filed a police report. The DA's office was reviewing the case. Derek had until Monday to provide documentation proving he had authority to sell the property, which of course he couldn't do. There was also a note that 3 separate law firms had contacted Pacific Coast Title on Derek's behalf, all trying to claim there had been a misunderstanding and that criminal prosecution would be excessive. Margaret's email ended with, "For what it's worth, you handled yourself with remarkable grace yesterday. Your grandmother would be proud." I printed the email and put it in the file folder I'd started 4 years ago when Grandma's attorney first handed me the trust documents. The folder was thick now, full of letters from Derek demanding his fair share, emails from family members pressuring me to be reasonable, documentation of every time I'd warned Derek to stop, every certified letter my attorneys had sent. If this went to trial, I had everything I needed, but I hoped it wouldn't come to that. 2 weeks later, I received a call from an attorney named Patricia Holmes. She represented Derek in what she carefully called the property dispute. "Miss Morrison, my client deeply regrets the miscommunication about the Malibu property," she began. It wasn't a miscommunication. It was fraud. That's a matter of interpretation. My client genuinely believed he had co-ownership rights based on verbal promises from your grandmother. Verbal promises don't override written trust documents. He's a lawyer. He knows that. There was a pause. Be that as it may, prosecuting your own brother seems extreme. Surely there's a way to resolve this within the family. He can start by admitting what he did and apologizing to the Parks for wasting their time and money. Then he can apologize to me for trying to steal my house. Then he can stop telling everyone I'm unstable and vindictive. Would you be willing to sign a statement saying you won't cooperate with any criminal prosecution? No, Miss Holmes. He made his choices. Now he lives with the consequences. That's how the world works. I hung up. My parents called that evening. I let it go to voicemail. My father's message was predictably outraged. "Maya Elizabeth Morrison, your mother, and I did not raise you to destroy your brother's life over a property dispute. You call us back immediately and explain yourself." My mother left a separate message. "Sweetheart, I know you're angry, but Derek is family. Whatever happened, we can work it out. Please don't let this tear our family apart." I didn't call back. The next morning, Derek himself showed up at the house. I watched from the office window as he pulled up in his BMW, sat in the car for 5 minutes, then finally got out and walked to the door. I didn't open it. "Maya, I know you're in there," he called through the door. "Please, we need to talk." I stayed silent. "I'm sorry." "Okay." I thought I was wrong about the ownership. I should have listened to you, but you don't understand the pressure I'm under. The firm is downsizing. My mortgage is underwater. I needed this sale. Still nothing from me. The DA is actually considering charges. Wire fraud, Maya. That's a federal crime. I could go to prison. Is that what you want? Your own brother in prison. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. What I wanted was for you to respect my property rights. What I wanted was for you to listen when I told you no. Repeatedly for months. What I wanted was for you to stop treating me like I'm incompetent just because I chose a different career path. I never thought you were incompetent. You told the Parks I wasn't good with business. You told the real estate agent I'd signed a power of attorney when I hadn't. You told Mom and Dad I was having a breakdown. You convinced yourself I didn't understand the legal documents because I didn't finish law school. I kept my voice level every step of the way. You dismissed my intelligence, my agency, my explicit refusal to participate in your scheme. It wasn't a scheme. I genuinely thought You thought what you wanted to think because it served your purposes. And now you're facing consequences, and you want me to save you from them. He looked older suddenly, smaller. What do you want from me? I want you to tell the truth to the Parks, to the DA, to our family. I want you to admit you were wrong and stop blaming me for the situation you created. And then you'll help me. You'll tell the DA it was a misunderstanding. No, but I won't actively push for prosecution either. What happens next is between you, the Parks, and the legal system. That's not good enough. It's all I'm offering. I started to close the door. Maya, wait. He put his hand on the door frame. I need to know. Are you really going to keep this place? All of it? Or are you just punishing me? I'm keeping it because Grandma wanted me to have it. I'm keeping it because I've turned it into something meaningful. A residency program for artists who need time and space to create. I'm keeping it because it's mine and I get to decide what happens to it. A residency program. He looked genuinely confused. What are you talking about? I've hosted 9 residents in the past 2 years, painters, writers, photographers, composers. They stay for 2 months, create their work, build their portfolios. One of them just got her first gallery show in New York. Another finished his novel and signed with an agent. It's exactly what Grandma would have wanted. Derek stared at me like I was speaking another language. You could have made $4.75 million. Instead, you're running some kind of artist commune. I'm honoring our grandmother's legacy. I'm creating something that matters more than money. I met his eyes. That's something you've never understood about me, Derek. I don't measure success the same way you do. He stood there for a long moment, then turned and walked back to his car without another word. I watched him drive away, then return to the office. My current resident, a sculptor from Oakland, was working in the converted garage studio. The sound of metal on stone carried on the ocean breeze. 3 months later, Derek pleaded guilty to attempted real estate fraud, 2 years probation, a $50,000 fine, and restitution to the Parks. He lost his job at the law firm. My parents stopped speaking to me. Some relatives took sides. Most pretended nothing had happened. The residency program continued. Artists came and went, creating beautiful work with ocean views and the freedom Grandma had always valued. I photographed their processes, documented their journeys, built an archive of creative transformation. Every sunset on the deck, I felt Grandma's presence, not as a ghost, but as vindication. She'd known exactly who would protect this place and who would destroy it for profit. Derek had asked if keeping the house was punishment, but I was simply honoring what mattered, building something meaningful from what I'd been trusted with. The house stood solid against the wind and waves. Exactly as Grandma intended.